And could I introduce the moderator for the next panel to the stage? It's the CEO of Clarksons Platou Securities, Erik Helberg. Erik.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Julian. Sustainable ownership is definitely a hot topic in capital markets today. A very hot topic. Question is there a perfect ownership model? How does it look like? What factors determine which is the right one? But I think that, regardless of whether you are a smaller family-owned shipping company or a large multinational stock-listed one, you still face a lot of the similar challenges and opportunities. And at the end of the day, I think that ownership kind of depends a lot on where you are in the cycle. But joining me on stage for this discussion, please welcome Kristin H, Leif Høegh, Kristian Siem, and Dacy. Thank you very much. Now, over the past few years, owners, seeking to finance their new building programs or second-hand acquisitions, or thank you very much, or facing a restructuring, obviously have increasing options. But with that, we also have a wide set of stakeholders that you need to communicate with, which includes the traditional banks, the credit export agencies, the public bond offerings, private equity, public equity. Despite that, we've seen that access to capital is becoming increasingly tougher. So my first question goes to you, Kristin. As an experienced banker, being with DNB since 1984, how did we get here?
I think it's important to acknowledge that, which many have talked about this morning, this industry has survived. The maritime industry in Norway has survived through cycles and is maybe stronger than ever. So it's definitely able to change. And I would say also the financial sector has been through dramatic changes and are in the midst. So we're talking about disruption for the shipping industry. You can talk about disruption for the financial sector, which is huge or humongous. For the financial sector, for this industry, I would say the maritime industry has become much more professional user of the capital market. And there's much more breadth to it than we saw 5-10 years ago. How did we get here today? I think there are many ways of answering that question. But capital is always available. It's just a matter of price. And that's the same today.
Thank you. Leif, you serve on the boards of Høegh Autoliners, which is a private company you own together with A.P. Møller Maersk, and on Høegh LNG, which is a publicly owned company and listed on the New York Stock Exchange. So very different financing and ownership models. How do you, what dictates your ownership discussions depending on the structure of your different companies?
Well, like Kristin said, the capital is available in lots of different sources at different times, fits business models and the stage development of companies. And I think in our situation for Høegh LNG, it started out with more difficult to find people than capital. And people and new ideas are extremely important when you build a new company and you try to disrupt an existing energy delivery model. And that's what we did 10 years ago, setting out to build this company. Since then, we have accessed most of the sources of capital, listed equity, bonds, bank financing, ECA financing, and so forth. And a lesson from all of that is the having access to a number of different capital markets allows us to optimize, to pull in the capital from the most attractive source at the right price at the right time, rather than to fix on only one model. just to say that being a private company or a listed company relying on equity and traditional bank financing is going to be the only source of growth capital. So breadth of capital markets access is very important.
Follow up for you, Kristin. Asset valuation, cash flow, and liquidity are obviously the most important or key importance when looking at arranging financing. But management and corporate governance, I guess, plays a role as well. How does DNB look at it when you're assessing new loan agreements?
I would turn it around and I would say I start with management. That's our partner. It's not the assets. So we start with, does this company have a viable business model? And as Leif is alluding to, this industry or the companies surviving are those embracing change when it comes to new financial sources, multitude of financial sources, broad-based globally. The old banking model might be slowing down anyway, and you need to have the broad part. Then you need also corporate structure, governing structure, which is transparent. You need a certain visibility of earnings, or then you need lower leverage. So you need a predictable company or predictable story for your investors, being banks or the other stakeholders. So I think the predictability, and that is back to good and solid, robust management.
Andy, being a prominent player, private equity player in shipping today, not following, let's call it, traditional investor buying listed public or bonds. Obviously, I would suspect that management, in addition to assets, plays a key role when you look at investments. Would you like to comment on how important it is for you as well?
Yeah, I think management is certainly critical. I think as we embarked on building out our shipping strategy, becoming more like a traditional shipping company became paramount to us over time. As owners of assets, ensuring that we had the commercial and technical capabilities to not only operate the ships, but also to be treated in a way by our constituents or by our partners, such as banks, that was more akin to what a traditional ship owner, how they would be treated, was very important to us. So I think creating that platform was essential. The one thing, just on a broader point, that worries me about this industry is, to Kristin's point, capital is always available. There's a tremendous amount of capital out in the marketplace today. It's not finding any returns in a lot of different areas. More traditional asset classes like fixed income, traditional equities are not providing the types of returns that people have been used to. And so capital, when it gets hungry, it often can make bad decisions. And I think shipping, for better or for worse, has been one of those places that capital has flooded. And I think it's done so in a way that perhaps was not influenced by the past in terms of how to set up the right governing model. And I think capital also has learned its lesson, and perhaps that one chart we saw where it was low for a long time now is a function of this overcapacity we've talked about. So I think this sort of cooperation that we're finding between all the constituents in the industry, to the extent that, especially banks as well, I find that banks, to the extent, as Kristin mentions, if they take the partnership as a critical pillar of the beginning process of that relationship, lending to perhaps new entrants, and I was a new entrant not so long ago, is something that should be taken very carefully. And this is a market that a lot of leverage can destroy you, and I think that has been a burden of our industry. So perhaps a lower leverage approach for everyone might be a better approach overall.
Okay, moving on. Kristian, you are by many considered to be the Warren Buffett of Norway, buying undervalued oil and shipping assets and holding them for a long time. And we're all aware of the crisis we're experiencing in the offshore market. In your opinion, where do you see, or is it possible to see opportunities in the current time? And do you think that the current crisis will change or has changed the relationship between owners and lenders?
A lot of questions there. I see myself as a long-term industrialist, that is correct. We're involved in many industries, and I listen to this technological revolution that's coming has been coming for some time and is such a strong factor. And then I think about the day-to-day problems that I deal with, and it's quite a conundrum that we can't deal with our day-to-day challenges in a more efficient way. You talked about the banks, for instance, and I am glad to hear Kristin talk about the importance of management. Yet we see the bank's ability to act when the industry is in a crisis like we have seen now. The bank actually de facto become the owner. That means the banks have to take the owner's responsibility and somehow instill the right management. And my experience is that the banks are not effective in making decisions. And I'm asking myself, why is that happening? Perhaps the regulatory environment we're in is part of the explanation. It's not easy to be a banker today. But there are so much rules and regulation imposed on the banking industry that it creates insecurity in the banking organization, and it creates a lot of distraction by the banking organization. And therefore, you don't have the bank manager who takes the judgment and therefore makes a decision. And I think this is something the whole industry is suffering from, not the least the banks themselves. Do I see opportunities? There are always opportunities. But I think whatever you do, it's back to basics, and that is to think long term, to think about what the world needs of whether it's equipment or services, and then position your company with a solid leadership to provide those requirements.
Kristin, would you like to give a brief comment to that?
We have had debates before, Kristian and I, on the issue, so I don't disagree with him that when it comes to specifically now the restructuring period we have been through, or we are in the middle of, or in maybe the next phase for the offshore industry, it's been extremely challenging. And I think it has surprised many of us because it's been complex. Many stakeholders, huge amounts, different agendas, many advisors. So, and not all companies have managed themselves to really drive the processes either. So yes, maybe the banks can take even more active role, but it's also, it's really a complexity we are in the middle of, which I think has surprised all of us. And the time it takes to get through has also surprised all of us.
A topic that definitely brings in the discussion of ownership is that many today, or you could say industry consensus, suggests that consolidation is both inevitable and desirable. And we have seen lately consolidation actually occurring. Do you think, and this is a question for all of you, do you think that that is the case? And you know, will it impact how we think about financing in the future? Leif, would you like to start?
In the industries or niches where the system is the value delivery model rather than the individual ship, I think scale matters a lot. Scale efficiency and systems are generally better when they're bigger. We see that in all other industries as well. And companies which are in the middle of significant change, whether imposed by technology or markets or elsewhere, I think are just as well operating in a private or in a limited ownership model. It's very, very difficult for incumbents with very large organizations to change rapidly. So I think it depends on the market environment, what you're trying to do. But generally, the shipping industry has been very fragmented, and where systems are becoming more important, and we see that in the container industry again and again over the last 40 years, and now more recently, that efficiencies have to be created through larger systems. But innovation is either done by outsiders or by small privately owned enterprises.
Kristian, you've been a consolidator. Any?
I have, and it has been my privilege to participate in the consolidation of the drilling industry over many years in Transocean. We had done a similar thing with Subsea 7, which is a product of a number of companies. I went out quite strongly last summer and suggested that the OSV space ought to consolidate. It's not only the direct savings of economies of scale, it's also the interaction with the clients. You have your presence all over the world in this international industry, which makes consolidation very sensible. And so I'm a great advocate of consolidation, and I think that is part of the solution to the problems we face in many segments of the marine world today.
Unfortunately, we're running out of time, but Andy, will consolidation be an interesting exit for the private equity players?
Some private equity players want to exit. We don't want to exit. We want to be a long-term player in this business. I do think that having a bigger company is a more financially sound approach to the business. Having a consolidated entity, which by definition is a bigger company, is one way to achieve that. If you look at, for example, the real estate industry back in the 1970s, it was governed by many, many small players. Often many were family-owned. And that market has institutionalized dramatically in the last 45 years, to the extent that while you still have developers, it's very infrequent that they don't have a large institutional partner to support them from a capital perspective. Now, the shipping industry is much smaller than the real estate industry, but I do think that that institutionalization, that consolidation, that critical mass will probably be one of the things that helps this industry stabilize. The banks will like that better. I think more sound decisions about ordering hopefully will be made. So I'm certainly a believer in that.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, so thank you very much for sharing this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you.